Hey guys, welcome. We are going to dive into the Spanish-American War today. So our focus and what we're going to learn from the video is mainly the causes and effects of this conflict. So a little review from last time I saw you guys. We introduced the idea of imperialism. And remember how we played that activity where you each had a sticky note and you're trying to claim parts of the room as yours. And that is basically imperialism. Imperialism is wanting to control or intervene and bother other countries in order to create an empire with them. So maybe another country has a resource that you might want. And so by controlling or getting involved in their government, you can have the benefit of that resource. And we like to compare imperialism with the opposite approach, which is called isolationism. And what's great about this term is it's kind of telling you exactly what it is in the word. To isolate is to keep to yourself, to be neutral. And so when people are in favor of being isolationist, they really want to keep out of other countries' business. And they really just want to focus on the United States and all the problems we have here, and not to expand past our own borders. And so that brings us to the Spanish American War. And it's probably the war that most people know the least about. And it's because it was super short. This war only lasted 6 weeks. And so this was a war back in 1898, which is going to be a big turning point in our history. One of those dates we just got to know. And one of the big effects of this war is we, as the United States, ends up becoming this global world imperialist power. And so let's jump into the causes and why this war starts in the first place. Okay, so one thing straight, it is called the Spanish-American War because we are fighting the Spanish. However, this war is centered in Cuba, which is a colony of the Spanish at the time. And so the first big cause of the Spanish-American War is an American ship that explodes in Havana Harbor in Cuba. That ship is called the USS Maine, and on board are over 100 Americans. And what happens when this ship explodes is we think that the Spanish may have sabotaged our ship. And that's why all of these men died. And it is one of the big causes of war being declared because we have convinced ourselves that another government has interfered in our business, and that has led to the death of Americans. Now, historians look back at this, and it's pretty much widely believed that this particular ship exploded due to a mechanical error, and it had nothing to do with the Spanish. And that brings us to this. This is a vocab word that we were kind of talking about earlier in class if you were with us. We looked at some fake news headlines. And they don't have the term fake news back in the 1898. They use yellow journalism, but it's basically the same thing. Yellow journalism means news that is sensationalized. It is exaggerated. It may have originally started with something that is true, but it's evolved into something that no longer is accurate. And what happens when the ship explodes is when the news reaches home in the United States, that story becomes more than it really is, right? We're talking about Spanish sabotage and, oh, they're trying to start war with us, when in reality, right, this was a mechanical failure. It was really nobody's fault. There is this letter that is written. And sorry, guys, I have a cold, so I'm not trying to be sniffling. There is this letter that is written called the Delome letter. Delome is the last name of the Spanish man who sent it. And he worked in the Spanish government. And he writes a note that in this note, he's calling out our president at the time, President William McKinley, as weak. Basically saying to the Spanish government, if they want to pick a fight with somebody, he's a weak president, and he's not going to respond. And President McKinley is a pretty egotistical man, and this really bothers him. This letter is printed in the American press, and pretty much everyone is trash talking him. He does not like that. And finally, the last big cause of the Spanish-American War, besides their ship exploding and our news, you know, making that sensationalized, and the how butthurt McKinley is over this letter calling him weak. Overall, we have some pretty strong economic interests in the region. We always want natural resources, and Cuba has tobacco and sugar. And those are expensive crops. Those are crops we would like to be able to sell and profit over. So 6 weeks later, this war is over. The United States wins. Let's get into the effects. Number one, the United States becomes a world imperialist power. Right, look at this drawing here. We have the United States flag, and it's wrapping those red stripes all over the world and expanding our empire. Right, we have a navy now. We can send that navy all over the world, and we become quite powerful. That's the power symbol here. Besides becoming an imperialist power, we gain a lot of land or territory. The five big ones you gotta know is because of the Spanish-American War, we have Puerto Rico, which is a protectorate of the United States. We also gained the territory of Guam, Hawaii, and Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. So not all of Cuba, just that small slice of land, which we still use today as a prison camp for terrorists. Last but not least is the Philippines. And I think the Philippines is kind of a sad story. They were colonized by the Spanish. And people in the Philippines were treated really poorly. And what happens during this war is they kind of exchange one colonial power for another, and that is us. We don't necessarily treat them too much better than the Spanish. But those are the five new territories that we kind of plant our flag on, that we gain from the Spanish and others because of this war. And we got two more left. Right, money comes back again. We also gain, through all this new territory, new markets. And what I mean by markets is a place to buy and sell. So we now have all of these places that have natural resources, and we can take those natural resources, sell them, get money. We have just more trading opportunities because of all this new crops and resources that we're able to profit off of. All right, and finally, guys, the Treaty of Paris of 1898 is the actual treaty that says, yep, this war is over, and it ends the war between Spain and the United States. So 1898 is a very important date in U.S. history. You'll often see it as called a turning point in our history because we go from being a quiet, isolated country to one that's after more and more. All right, guys, thanks for listening.